Video games. They've been around for over 30 years now. Well, a lot more, but being accurate. And of course, like anything that's gone long enough, it's changed a lot. And there's one long-running series that I want to focus on today. That being one of probably the most artistically interesting game series that I know of. That being Kingdom Hearts. And while I normally would go through the entire series to understand how it's changed, how it's evolved, and all that, I quickly realized my mistake, and I just stuck to the original trilogy because it was way too much of a headache. And with that flawless intro out of the way, let's go into a tiny bit of history before we get into it to understand where all this is coming from. The Square Enix and Disney crossover series Kingdom Hearts has been around for just over 22 years, and across its lifespan has changed and evolved in both design philosophy along with its style, and is readily apparent to tell due to how much the series remained remarkably consistent in game design and making comparisons a lot easier than it usually is with a lot of other long-running series that change it up with every game or two, although for this only comparing the original 3 games in the series, that being Kingdom Hearts 1, Kingdom Hearts Rechain of Memories, and Kingdom Hearts 2, releasing in March 2002 for the PlayStation 2. Being a crossover of Final Fantasy and Disney, much of the art direction in the game usually takes heavy inspiration from both, as the art direction in every game in the series is divided into 2 types, Disney worlds and then the original worlds. As while Final Fantasy characters do appear, we've never gotten a time of writing, gotten a location from Final Fantasy game, so the original worlds act as a stand-in most of the time. As Disney worlds take a massive cues from the films and properties they are based on, with majority locations and people being just 3D versions from the movies or films that they are originally from. Meanwhile, the original worlds in this game are a more simplistic approach to Final Fantasy design, with a more animated look to them. For example, Destiny Islands, which is majorly just 2 beaches and a cave, but is much more styled after Final Fantasy X's Besaid Beach compared to any Disney property. But a perfect example of Final Fantasy's roots in the game is the final world aptly named The End of the World. Like most of the game's world is seeped in the RPG design that games like Final Fantasy X and Chrono Trigger made genre staples. With its cosmic horror feel and abstract landscape, The End of the World cements itself as the true final test of this game, but also late to become a fun parallel to its sequel's endgame, but something else I need to talk about. And that would be the original characters that are created for the original Kingdom Hearts game, with only 4 well and truly original characters being our main protagonist Sora, Tritagonist Riku and Kairi, and the antagonist of the game, Ansem. With these 4 following a similar design philosophy of combining designs of a Square Enix character with the Disney aesthetic of over-exaggerated proportions, much like a lot of their cartoons, but still retain the Final Fantasy designs. Kingdom Hearts 1 Sora is a perfect example of this, and while originally planned to be either Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse, Sora was eventually born from this idea clash. With the distorted disproportions of his body and his comically oversized gloves and shoes with his rounded shape of his character, he feels much more like a Disney cartoon than a Square Enix character. But the spiky over-the-top hair and fashion brings out that part of his character. The same somewhat applies to Riku, who admittedly has much less distorted proportions in comparison to Sora. That combined with his less dramatic design and tamed hair, Riku is essentially everything Sora is criticized for in the game. Sora is lazy, but Riku works hard. Sora is childish, Riku is mature. Sora is brash, Riku is composed, etc., etc. His design reflects this, while Sora's wild, spiky hair, Riku in contrast is much more tamed, flowing hairstyle. Riku uses blue as his primary color in contrast to Sora's red. His design notably holds 2 pieces of foreshadowing hidden within his design, those being the cross over his chest in contrast to Sora's open jacket, perfectly representing their attitudes in the game, with Sora's open jacket and heart showing his openness to connection, while Riku's closed-off vest hides something like how he hides himself in previous or new attempts at connections. And a slightly more obvious connection is Riku sharing a color scheme with Sora's iconic weapon, the Kingdom Key. With the gold hilt and blue accents, we find out later in Kingdom Hearts that the Kingdom Key was originally supposed to be Riku's, thus their color schemes match. Funny, ain't it? Kairi, much like Sora and partially Riku, is designed to emulate late 90s and early 2000s Disney movies with the proportions and rounded face shape. Even her color scheme acts as a midpoint to the boys, with her lilac color scheme with the pots of yellow. Even her hair contrasts with the boys, with her shorter, straight, dark red hair, with her, for the time, modern fashion sense, helps her stand out from the boys' completely insane fashion sense, which in comparison looks just wild. Then finally, the big bad with only about 10-ish minutes of screen time in this game, Ansem. Before we get to one guy in this series who cannot wear a shirt for the life of him, I want to talk about his two minor appearances where either he is someone else or he is hiding, those being his hooded form and him possessing Riku. As a hooded figure, Ansem at the beginning of the game is your archetypical mysterious figure, with his featureless hood, sloping design, and muddy color scheme, but then when he possesses Riku, he's wearing his dark outfit, consisting of a black and purple skin-tight suit that he has the appearance of muscle sinew with the embossed heartless symbol on his chest, and an off-white cloth and belt around his waist. All of this gives Riku the feeling of an RPG boss character, with his less exaggerated proportions, and this all fits in with Ansem very well. And speaking of Ansem finally, let's talk about his design. Ansem is easily the most realistic looking character in the original game, with no exaggerated proportions or cartoonish design features. Ansem, for all intents and purposes, is a Final Fantasy villain, clearly taking inspiration from Final Fantasy VII antagonist Sephiroth, with their manes of silver hair, long shoulder-padded coats, and lack of shirts for some reason. But this all splits off in different areas, such as the heartless insignia on Ansem's chest, Ansem's coat from the waist down being a light grey, accompanied by white forearm-length gloves, all adding on tan skin and piercing amber eyes. Ansem gives off a much more menacing aura when surrounded by much more cartoonish characters, helped by his Dark Guardian, a hulking spectral figure Ansem controls, with his crooked antenna emerging from the top of its head, a large heart-shaped hole in its abdomen, along with jagged teeth held by bandages across its chest and mouth, giving the creature an appearance of a spirit, helped by the lack of legs, as it wasn't enough to take Ansem to his final form. Boat Ansem. But in all seriousness, the final form of Ansem, dubbed the World of Chaos, is a monumental organic warship made up of Ansem and the Guardian, with Ansem staying mainly the same despite ditching the jacket and turning his eyes full-on orange, with the Guardian becoming more monstrous with the rest of the ship, being something else entirely with its massive frontal face, fleshy core, and plant muscles artillery. The World of Chaos takes after many different Square Enix bosses transformed into giant creatures as the final boss fight. All in all, the original Kingdom Hearts had a lot to establish right out the gate for just existing, as one of, to this day, the most ridiculous crossovers in history, on top of being a successful and artistically cohesive game. And of that front, I think the game knocked out the park with its aesthetics and theming, because despite being radically different characters and worlds, the game knew what it was and what it wanted to do right out the gate, and strongly identified itself, and it helped everything in the game lock into place its natural absurdity, along with the simple but emotional story about three friends being pulled apart and trying to find their way back together. But it leaves enough threads to open the story, and eventually, they did. Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, or more accurately, Chain of Memories, as the original Game Boy version is just a pixelated version of all the locations in Kingdom Hearts 1, so I'm going to focus on the remaster that, while it did release 3 years after the original game's sequel, is still supposed to be played before Kingdom Hearts 2, so I'll talk about it here. But in terms of the world style, all but 2 of the worlds, air quotes, in this game, are just boxy preset rooms with different wallpaper of a Kingdom Hearts 1 world using the same models and textures to the original. So instead, I'll talk about the game's unique worlds, starting with Castle Oblivion. The pristine and eerie halls of this castle is where 90% of every important scene in this game takes place, and these lend themselves well to the tone of this story, that being isolation. Throughout the game, as Sora, Donald, and Goofy move through the floors of the castle, they discover that their memories are vanishing, and the farther you go up, the more you will lose. So whenever we are thrown to the edge of the halls that these make up this castle, we know something is going to be different about Sora, and we see this with him becoming sharper and more aggressive as time goes on within the castle. But getting back to the art and design of this game, the antagonists of this story, known as the Organization, they are interesting as they are slightly different style to the rest of the characters in this game, with Sora and Riku keeping their KH1 models, and this takes place directly after the end of the first game, keeping their Disney/Final Fantasy designs. Meanwhile, the Org members are ripped straight out of the Final Fantasy games with sharper features and their uniform black coats. And while they do have colourful and wacky hairstyles accustomed to those games, but this style shift seems to be an artistic one, as seeing their much more physically intimidating characters interacting with these cartoons like Sora adds to the alien feel of the castle. But like the Disney villains in the original, despite what intimidating they could be, they usually devolved into a comedy act at the end of the defeat and just lost that threat overall. The Organization is a constant threat to our protagonist. Not once does the game turn these Organization members into these jokes to keep the game lighthearted. As we learn to go on, the Organization are known as nobodies, and they have no hearts. In that vein, you also have the mysterious cloaked man known as Diz, With his mummy-like appearance in his large maroon robes and matching head wrappings, he gives off a similar atmosphere to cloaked Ansem. But giving a look at his single eye, we get a lot more expression of him despite only seeing just that one eye in his mouth. Then we have the lovely memory witch who gives this game its title, Naminé. On the whole, Naminé is an incredibly simplistic design, and this is on purpose, as Naminé is an inherently lonely character with no memories of her own and nobody of Kairi. Naminé is a blonde Kairi clone, as she is a clone of Kairi being identical to her aside from her hair and simple white dress and shoes. Naminé reflects both her own lack of memory and connection, her prison of the Castle Oblivion, and her own innocence around the organization being one of the few moments of levity or happiness in this game, otherwise bleak matter. Chain of Memories was designed both to bring the series to a different system and tie two totally different games together across a new system before the shiny remaster that brought it to our, at the time, current consoles. And it also did this by making most of the game a journey through our own memories of the first game. But instead of having a fun in the past, it seeps in the dread of losing yourself as we go through these Frox approximations of memories and uses an uncanny location like the Castle Oblivion with its cold and blank interior, reinforced with the much more grey ideas being introduced by a much darker characters compared to the previous Disney fare, with all this leading to a shift in the art direction and the story. Kingdom Hearts 2, as the original final game in this now somewhat forgotten trilogy, was for all intents and purposes the full shift to the character design style introduced with both Ansem and the organization in the first two games, with the Disney influence on some characters starting to fade in return for a more Final Fantasy-esque design. But before that, I want to talk about a world that I skipped in my Chain of Memory section, that being Twilight Town. This fairly large French town is named suggests to be stuck in a constant sunset with the orange color scheme matching its aesthetics, similar to how Traverse Town matched its constant nighttime setting. This is a much more extensive setting than the original hub world of the game, with a large plaza, tram station, underground tunnels, terrace, and gigantic clock tower giving off a very different vibe to that of the starting area in the first game, Destiny Islands. This is also our first taste of how designs have changed at the start of the series, with slimmer characters, sharper features, and more correct proportions on more than just a select few characters. With consistent character shapes being the norm now, a good example of this is the new common enemy of the game, known as Nobodies. They function similar to Heartless in the original game, but unlike the more primitive and organic Heartless, Nobodies are much more humanoid and intelligent, being able to carry out precise objectives and even communicate with people. We learn later on that they are the companion of Heartless when a heart is removed from the body, and that they are what is left behind, and that they lack hearts themselves. The different types of Nobodies we meet in the game represent the different organization members we meet, and have met previously in Chain of Memories. The humanoid Nobodies that we do meet in this game, organization members, are said to fake their emotions using their memories of their previous life in order to trick others into thinking that they have emotions themselves. But getting on back to the character design style of this game, if you want a good design to show off the difference between the last two games, then take our starting character Roxas, with his much more casual and muted streetwear attire compared to that of Sora's loud colours and wild proportions. With his long pants, smaller shoes, no gloves, and simple jacket, Roxas was a major jump from Sora in the original game, but still familiar enough with his piercing blue eyes and spiky hair. So that upon the discovery that Roxas is the nobody of Sora, our mind transition makes sense, but you really want to show the difference. Look at Sora in the first part of the game as a prime example. As a year spent sleeping, Sora has grown with smaller hair, sharper features, and longer limbs. And his less cartoony proportions, Sora looks a lot more out of place than he ever was in his original outfit. It looks tiny on him now, and is a very fun way to show the difference between 1 and 2's design philosophies with his new outfit as compared to the original vibrant colours and simple design, leaning towards his Disney inspiration. Kingdom Hearts 2 leans itself more into its Final Fantasy roots this time around, with this predominantly black colour scheme and light grey seams, yellow straps to break up the design, and alongside the large red leg pouches that replaces old pants and chain incorporates its original colour scheme into the design. New to this are the grey shoulder guards and much smaller gloves with a grey X pattern, and more intrinsic extra details give this outfit a much more complex look compared to his Kingdom Hearts 1 outfit, being a great example of both Sora's mindsets in these games, as a simple hero's journey in the original game, and so is dressed as a complement to that state of mind, while in 2, due to a mix of Roxas' pain along with everything the organization puts Sora through, it focuses much more on the complicated story to go through, and thus the outfit reflects this in turn. We also get new outfits of Riku and Kairi, who changed in this game after the time skip, with Riku donning an organization coat for the majority of this game, hiding his face along with his voice, so that the only thing we can go off is Sora claiming it is Riku, and him using Riku's Soul Eater from the original game. Only one cutscene though. Then in the final world it's revealed it's Ansem? Well, not really. It's Riku who has become Ansem, but with Riku's voice, as we are treated to this how this form came to be while battling Roxas before the events of this game. Which, still weird. Yep, it's just weird. I can't get around it. It's disturbing, and I'm so glad I don't have to listen to it all the time. But, if you want to know how, Riku unleashed his darkness from the end of reaching a memory, transforming him physically into Ansem. This acts as somewhat of a relapse in his mindset for Riku, as while he did confront his darkness at the end of reaching a memories, he fell back into this mindset due to his self-imposed isolation. We could even see this in his flashback form before his transformation, his hair becoming longer and unkempt, unlike his original, more tamed hairstyle, along with embracing his Nier Automata fan with a simple black blindfold covering his eyes. And now finally, after that huge plot bomb, we get Riku's official design in this game that brings him closer to the new design mentality now more than ever, completely ditching his Disney influence with even his proportions, and finally brings up the age gap between the trio, as Riku now is much taller than before with a very visible height difference, along with more heavily exposing how far he had fallen with his sloppy attire, baggy pants, half-zip shirt, undone jacket, and grey trainer shoes, with much more muted colour scheme than his bright yellow and blue being replaced by a pale white with pops of muted yellow and a pale blue pants, all matching his much more muted disposition in Kingdom Hearts 2. Oh my god, I said muted quite a bit. But compared to his previous more brash and emotional self, all in all, this new look is both evolution and embodiment of Riku's character at this point in his life. But along with this new design came finally his own Keyblade, the Way to Dawn, being a reference to the end of Chain of Memories, with the main base of the weapon being an elongated and straightened out Soul Eater, with the small eye guard and new circle guard, with half being a lightly yellowed feather wing and the other being a light purple bat wing, similar to the Oathkeeper and Oblivion Keyblades, with the teeth of the Keyblade being a large angelic wing, with the keychain being a heartless Emma with the internal cross connected by a thick metal chain in his weapon. This weapon embodies Riku's struggles through the entire journey of the last two games and his commitment to walk the path of neither pure light or darkness. Then there's Kairi. Sweet, sweet Kairi. Ugh. Who, much like the last game, sadly doesn't play much of a proactive role in this game and spends most of the game waiting for her friends after connecting to Roxas during the prologue, and doesn't take much of an active role until the last act of the game, where she doesn't really do a lot. And originally she spends most of her few appearances in a standard school uniform with much longer hair and more realistic proportions like with Sora. Along with having much longer hair, this is mostly done to convey the passage of time, as a year had passed since the events of Kingdom Hearts 1, as I have said previously. Just need to bring it up. Overall, Kairi's new design seems a lot more combat ready compared to her Kingdom Hearts 1 design, and being easily comparable to Sora's Kingdom Hearts 2 design, and is brought forward when she is given her own Keyblade after being silent for the back half of Kingdom Hearts 1, known as Destiny's Embrace. With this very simple design of orange and yellow colour scheme, the series heart logo inverse being the grip that led to a small yellow vine that combines the pole with small leaves and light blue bulb with the large flower that makes up the teeth of the weapon, with the Powerpuff Fruit keychain connected by a red silk rope along the short stature of this weapon, and looks like a very definition of non-threatening, very much keeping in mind with Kairi's caring nature. And then there is Big Man Xemnas himself, and his base of operations known as the World That Never Was. Unlike his heartless counterpart End of the World That Never Was is more manufactured appearance to reflect the Nobi's ability to think and plan rather than act on instinct like the Heartless. But getting back to Xemnas for a moment, most of his design is in the organization's signature black coat, with his face being obscured until the second act Battle of 1,000 Heartless in the game, where you learn that it is him and Ansem were once the same man who took the name Ansem, and that Ansem we met in KH1 was this man's Heartless. So when looking at Ansem and Xemnas side by side, they look incredibly similar, but with some minor changes. The most obvious being Xemnas' much sharper and slightly shorter hairstyle, with his long flowing bangs and much less tamed hair with a good chunk hanging from both sides of his shoulders. His slightly lighter skin tone, but he does keep a signature orange eyes of Ansem, along with much more angular face shape compared to that of Ansem, who has a slightly, I want to say round, but I can't because he's way too much of a jawline. But overall, Ansem's design is pretty standard for this game. It doesn't change later on, but now I want to focus on the world that never was. The first chunk of this world is known as the Dark City. This massive city seems to sit in a perpetual night, the sky illuminated by giant artificial Kingdom Hearts in the sky. This city is made up of a large black skyscrapers with bright neon signs littering them, with the center of the city being Memory Skyscraper, a large building covering bright neon TVs, the top we have seen in the first game. Well, the secret ending to the first game, but we see it there, kind of. But we also saw this in Riku's battle with Roxas in a flashback we will see in a few minutes. Well, a few levels, depends how good you are at the game. But we even fight Xemnas in this part of the city in a somewhat construct he makes near the end of the game, with only really having the skyscraper there. But then later, after a heartbreaking fight with Roxas that made all of us cry, we find an alley that leads to an artificial cliff face, which eventually leads to the main point of this world. Geniusly named, that's not how you say genius, but it's fine, the Castle That Never Was. Whoever named that deserves a raise. The entire castle seems technological, with wireframe patterns, blank white and grey colour schemes that act as a refreshing switch up from the Dark City's colour palette, with the most occasional pop of neon blue is amongst the panelling and circuit boards. We see these colours most prominently inside the room known as the Proof of Existence. This room acts as a gateway with the cemetery between the organization members, with the headstones representing dead members being red in colour, even cracked and broken in some instances, with an icon representing their signature weapons and their titles being displayed. This room is shockingly effective at reminding us that we are responsible for nearly all of these deaths, even without saying one word, as well as hinting towards Sora finding out Roxas with his nobody with its lit up gravestone. But overall, the castle is somewhat confusing with uniform design, but still managed to make the places it need to feel unique enough to feel like we are progressing up this monolithic structure, using different layouts for rooms and more outdoors areas so we can feel like we are eventually making it to the place known as the Altar of Naught, which is a large platform that directly faces the artificial Kingdom Hearts. By this point, we see it as a massive pink and black crater that seems to leak out the collected hearts that make up this massive heart-shaped moon. From here, the final fight of the game ensues, where we see Xemnas fuse with the castle and assume a new armoured form, adorned with dozens of nobody sigils that made up a light blue, grey, gold-plated armour, with 3 large pointed crowns on both his shoulder and faceplate. Adding to this kingly armour, he has long flowing sleeves that seem fused to the ground and sharp claw-like gauntlets. More strikingly, the armour has a small set of angel wings on his right shoulder, and in front of that, a massive yellow, red, and white growth that seems to connect into this new castle/dragon, or as I call it, the dragon that never was. Pay me, Disney, please. This final armored form is also a callback to the organization members present within this game, as the seat Xemnas is fused to is made up of all their weaponry, with the main throne spikes being made of Axel's chakrams, 2 of Saix's spiked claymores are placed on either side of his throne, underneath 2 sets of Xaldin's spears, and finally atop we see Xigbar's spiked arrow guns on top of his own nobody sigiled broadsword. With all this taking place at the head of the Dragon Castle seems to be flying through an endless void. Again, very on brand for Square Enix, but does go a long way to elevate the stakes of the final fight, or so you would think. But then Xemnas busts out his final form like he's a freaking Dragon Ball villain. Like most Dragon Ball villains, his final form is just a variation of his original look. With him taking on, instead of his big armoured form, he takes on a much more simplistic white version of his original coat, with black nobody sigils adoring it, which also connects him to his final arena, that being what he calls the World of Nothingness. Like I said, fun little callback to the World of Chaos. I do know my stuff sometimes. But while this does act as a callback to the World of Chaos, it more or less anything comes back as a parallel, a stark one at that. With the World of Chaos being a messy, unorganized abomination, is a good word for it, of all the different body parts, monsters, and creatures like Heartless in the game, the World of Nothingness is, well, as it says, nothing. It's a grey, empty void filled with nobody sigils, and it's cold and unfeeling. You could get an emotion out of the World of Chaos. You could even see it emote from the front-face cannon and Ansem himself. World of Nothingness is just cold. It's disturbing, and it's in a very effective way to communicate how nihilistic Xemnas is in his approach. He claims to want to free all of the nobodies from this pain of being alone, but he revels in it. He embraces it calmly. And that's what he's all about. It's a very effective way to communicate a villain's motivations with just a few words and a bit of dialogue. Kingdom Hearts 2, much like the original game, had a lot to prove right at the gate. It had to prove itself as a worthy sequel to both these games and a satisfying ending, as this was originally meant to be the final installment in this series. Or the final main installment anyway. The teaser at the ending made sure we wouldn't forget that one. But as an ending to the original 3 games, I think this knocked it out of the park. as it brought characters back together and both visually and from a writing perspective evolved and improved upon them in interesting ways. With this game following up the depressing affair that was Chain of Memories, this game's tone was always going to be a mix-up from the first game and the art, and it shows in everything seeming just a little bit less Disney, so to speak, and overall, as a conclusion to the designs and art style this series has gone through, it cements itself as a great crossover and put together one at that. In conclusion, after replaying and reanalyzing this trilogy, or kind of trilogy, I must say it's impressive how consistent this series was from both a graphical, story, and artistic perspective. The series demonstrated the influence of both Disney and Square Enix in a loving celebration of what made these two companies great, while still telling an entertaining, compelling story from both. What we are told and what we are shown in this series is as subtle as a jackhammer, so pulling the meaning from the world and character design wasn't too difficult. But the abundance of show and don't tell in this series employs is astounding. Just looking at the character designs both in and out of the game tells you so much about them with only the bare context needed to understand it. And this is both a great strength and weakness to its story, but overall I take it as a positive. While I only covered the bare basic of this series, I wanted to show how a series can evolve and change, only a few minor alterations to its core design ideas overall.